Have you ever noticed how manipulators don't come crashing through the door? They slip in quietly, wearing charm like a disguise. They compliment you, agree with you, even seem impressed by you. But over time, something subtle shifts. Your voice starts to feel quieter. Your choices a little less yours. You begin apologizing more often, explaining things that shouldn't need explanation, giving parts of yourself without quite knowing why. Meanwhile, they give just enough approval, just enough warmth to keep you second-guessing reality. And by the time you sense that something's off, it's already begun. You've already been gently, almost invisibly, steered in a direction you never agreed to. It's like sitting in a boat with a slow leak. At first, you don't feel the water rising. The sun is shining. The surface seems calm, even beautiful. But beneath that quiet surface, you're sinking inch by inch. And the person across from you? They're handing you a bucket with one hand while quietly poking new holes with the other. Or picture a chessboard. You think you're playing the game, making your own moves. But every step you take is anticipated, guided, limited like invisible hands are arranging the outcome. The manipulator doesn't have to move a piece. They've already mastered the board. That's what manipulation does. It's not loud. It doesn't need to be. It simply plays your emotions against you until your instincts turn into weapons used against your own self. But here's the truth. Awareness is your first line of defense. Once you begin to recognize the patterns woven beneath their polished charm, their grip weakens. Their control relies on your unawareness, on your silence, your doubts, your need to please. But when you stop reacting and start noticing, everything changes. Their power begins to dissolve the moment you reclaim your energy, not with anger, not with dramatic resistance, but with quiet clarity. When you draw your boundaries without noise, without fear, without apology, the game begins to collapse. The Stoic doesn't chase the manipulator's approval. They simply refuse to play. So how do you stay steady in a world where silence is misread as surrender and kindness mistaken for permission? How do you hold your ground without raising your voice or lowering your worth? Stay until the end, because the final shift will give you back more than just your power. It'll give you peace. Let's begin. But before we dive in, take a moment to absorb this story, one that might illuminate truths you felt but couldn't quite name. The story of Grace, the sand that swallowed the blade. Grace had always believed that staying kind meant staying agreeable. When someone criticized her, she softened her tone. When guilt was cast her way, she overcompensated, working harder, giving more, trying desperately to prove she was good. And when someone stepped over a boundary, she read through it, not to protect herself, but to keep the peace. It wasn't that she was weak. No, Grace was thoughtful, intelligent, deeply compassionate. But she had learned somewhere along the way that protecting others' comfort mattered more than protecting her own. Still, over time, she began to notice something unsettling. The more she gave, the more was expected. The more silent she remained, the more others began to speak for her, decide for her, even define her. Even when she hadn't done anything wrong, she found herself explaining, justifying, defending. Always the one bending. Always the one walking on eggshells. One evening, after a draining phone call that left her questioning her own sanity again, Grace decided to visit her Aunt Elaine. Elaine, a retired therapist, had a quiet strength and a gaze that seemed to see straight through surface-level words. Grace poured everything out, the confusion, the fatigue, the way her words were twisted, her intentions doubted, the exhaustion of always feeling like the villain in a story she didn't write. Her aunt listened patiently, then stood up and returned with a small box. Inside it was a silver blade and a jar of fine desert sand. Without explaining much, she handed both to Grace. "Stab this into the floor," she said with a calm but deliberate tone. Grace hesitated, brows furrowed in confusion, but trusted her aunt enough to follow the instruction. She knelt, took the blade, and pressed it into the wooden floor. The blade cut through cleanly, piercing the boards with sharp precision. "Now try the sand," her aunt added gently. Grace looked down at the small jar in her other hand. She slid the blade into the soft, shifting grains. The sand moved, adjusted, and then absorbed the blade without a sound. No crack, no resistance. Just silence, stillness. The blade disappeared into the grains, held firmly, yet effortlessly. Her aunt met her gaze, eyes steady and kind. "That's the difference," she sighed. "Most people are like wood. Every insult cuts. Every harsh word leaves a scar. But mentally strong people, they become the sand. Still soft, still human, but completely untouchable." She paused, letting the metaphor sink in. They don't try to block the blade. They absorb it so quietly, so peacefully, that it loses all its power. Nothing sticks, nothing breaks them. And in that moment, something shifted within Grace. That night, she understood what her aunt had been trying to show her, not just with words, but with experience. In the days that followed, people began to notice. There was something different about her. She wasn't reacting the same way. The anxious need to explain herself had faded. She wasn't defending every move or justifying every feeling. Instead, she was calm. Still warm, still kind, but no longer vulnerable to the barbs that used to sink deep into her. She stopped absorbing poison disguised as concern. She stopped explaining her boundaries to those who never respected them anyway. And when someone tried to twist her words, she didn't argue. She didn't even flinch. There was no dramatic exit. No righteous speech. Just quiet, steady strength. Because true resilience isn't always loud or hard. Sometimes, strength is like sand, yielding just enough to stay unshaken, soft enough to remain human, but strong enough to silence even the sharpest blade. Before we begin with the first lesson, if you find these videos helpful, I encourage you to subscribe and turn on notifications to stay updated on the latest content. Let's begin. Number 1. Spot the patterns. Not just the words. Let's talk about one of the most deceptive tools. Manipulators use words that sound warm, but carry something colder underneath. These are the people who speak with gentle tones, compliment often, and always seem to know exactly what to say. On the surface, they appear genuine, but when the conversation ends, something lingers. You walk away unsure of what just happened. You start second-guessing yourself. Were you too sensitive? Did you read too much into it? Why? Because their words were calm, their tone composed. Yet something felt off. What they say and what they do don't align. And that's exactly where manipulation begins to take root. Here's the truth. Manipulators aren't dangerous because of what they say once. They're dangerous because of what they repeat quietly, consistently. It's not about one sarcastic remark or a single moment of guilt-tripping. It's the pattern. The way your confidence always seems to shrink around them. The way you find yourself apologizing for things that aren't wrong. The way they frame your boundaries as selfishness and your success as mere luck. They don't confront you directly. They don't shout. Instead, they distort. Slowly, subtly, like water carving through stone. One drop at a time. So if you're only paying attention to the surface, the words they want you to hear, you'll miss the real damage happening underneath. This is where Stoic wisdom becomes a shield. As Marcus Aurelius once wrote, don't be surprised when the dishonest act dishonest. Be prepared. The Stoics didn't waste energy on shock or outrage. They studied behavior. They noticed patterns. And they refused to hand over their peace to anyone who hadn't earned it. They believed in observing patterns. Because the truth is, anyone can say something kind once. Anyone can show interest when there's something in it for them. Momentary kindness can be rehearsed. But someone who genuinely values you will demonstrate it consistently. They won't make you guess. They won't leave you decoding mixed signals. They won't praise your growth one day and guilt trip you the next. They won't confuse your progress with betrayal. They won't shift between approval and criticism like it's a game of emotional whiplash. And if someone does that, if their words comfort you while their actions tear you down, that's not poor communication. That's strategy. Let me share a story. A friend of mine, we'll call her Ashley, worked closely with someone named Todd. Outwardly, Todd was the model of a team player. He smiled often, asked about her day, even brought her coffee occasionally, the kind of gestures that make someone seem supportive. But underneath those small courtesies, there was a different story unfolding. Every time Ashley achieved something, whether it was landing a new client, finishing a project, or being praised in a meeting, Todd would say things like, "Wow, you're lucky management likes you," or "That's great. Must be nice to get the easy clients." At first, she brushed it off. Maybe it was sarcasm. Maybe he was just teasing. But over time, the pattern became clear. He began taking credit for her ideas. In meetings, he'd interrupt her, subtly correcting her in front of others, inserting his opinion in ways that diminished hers. That it wasn't one dramatic betrayal. It was 1,000 paper cuts, so small, they almost seemed harmless. But they added up. And when she finally confronted him, he played innocent. "Ashley, come on, I support you. You're taking this too personally." That was the moment it clicked. His words painted one picture, but his behavior painted another. And suddenly, it wasn't confusing anymore. It was calculated. So she stopped explaining herself. She stopped hoping he'd understand or change or suddenly respect her. Instead, she created space, emotional distance. She realized that real support doesn't feel like confusion. It feels like clarity. So, how do you protect yourself from this kind of subtle manipulation? First, stop giving so much power to how someone says something. A calm tone doesn't always mean kind intentions. Second, observe repeated behaviors. Is there a pattern? Do they consistently make you feel guilty, small, or controlled, especially after you speak up for yourself? Third, trust what you feel when no one's watching. When the conversation ends and you're alone, what lingers? Confidence? Or self-doubt? Because if someone's presence consistently leaves you second-guessing your worth, the problem isn't your sensitivity. It's their pattern. At the end of the day, you're not crazy for noticing the pattern. You're wise. So don't just listen, observe. Because once you see the pattern, you'll see the truth. And that truth becomes your freedom. Number 2. Slow down your emotional response. Now let's talk about one of the most powerful defenses you can build when someone tries to manipulate your mind or emotions. Emotional stillness. Manipulation doesn't thrive on facts. It thrives on momentum. It feeds on urgency, on the belief that you must react now, explain now, fix things right now. They want you to panic, to rush, to stumble in your defense. Because the faster you respond, the easier it is for them to twist your words or redirect the blame. But here's the secret. When someone tries to control you emotionally, silence becomes your strength. Time becomes your shield. Because the moment you pause not to shut down, but to reflect, their power begins to unravel. They can't steer what isn't moving. Here's the truth. Manipulators don't want you thinking. They want you reacting. They don't want your clarity. They want your confusion. They want your heart racing, your logic clouded, your confidence shaken. But when you choose not to give in, when you breathe, observe, and respond on your terms, you reclaim control. They use urgency as a tool, pressing in with words designed to corner you, phrases like, "So, are you going to answer, or not? Or why are you taking so long to respond?" These aren't just casual questions. They are subtle traps built to speed you up, to force your hand, because the faster you move, the less you think. The quicker you react, the more predictable you become. And predictable people are easy to manage, easy to manipulate. What they count on is your emotional autopilot, that instinct to soothe discomfort by acting quickly. But here's the shift. When you slow down, when you take even one deliberate breath instead of taking the bait, you interrupt the script. Suddenly, you're not playing your part. You're stepping off stage. And that's when everything changes. You stop being easy to provoke. You stop rushing to meet their timeline. You stop handing over your piece just because someone demands it with intensity. This is where Stoic wisdom becomes a compass. Epictetus once said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." And in moments of pressure, that mastery begins with stillness. The Stoic doesn't react just to relieve tension. They don't race to defend. They don't mistake urgency for truth. They pause. They allow space to breathe, to observe, to choose not just react. Because emotions are human, they're natural. But reacting blindly to every emotional wave, that's a choice. And one you don't have to keep making. When you practice that pause, when you sit with the discomfort instead of sprinting to escape it, you become something else entirely, not a puppet dancing to someone else's pull, but the quiet author of your own response. Let me share a story. A man I know, will call him Daniel, was in a relationship that looked fine on the surface, but was emotionally exhausting underneath. His partner had a way of twisting every disagreement into a test. She'd cry, blame, accuse. She'd even threaten to leave, not to communicate, but to pressure, to win. And for a long time it worked. Daniel would jump to fix everything. He'd apologize, even when he hadn't done anything wrong. He lived in a state of emotional reaction, walking on eggshells, always trying to prove he was good enough. But one day, something shifted. In the middle of an argument, when the tension hit its peak and he felt that old urge rising to fix, to rescue, to defend, Daniel paused. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He simply said, "I need some time to think about this." Then he calmly walked away. That moment, simple, silent, was revolutionary, because she couldn't control what she couldn't provoke. She couldn't manipulate someone who no longer rushed to meet her emotional demands. And Daniel? He realized something powerful. Control doesn't come from always having the right words. It comes from choosing the right silence. So how do you build this kind of emotional discipline? How do you slow down in the heat of the moment? First, recognize the pattern. When urgency shows up, ask yourself, is this a real emergency or manufactured pressure? Second, buy time. Use simple phrases like, "Let me think about that," or "I need a moment." You don't owe anyone an instant reaction. Third, remind yourself, a calm response is always stronger than a forced one. There is strength in slowness. There is control in stillness, because at the end of the day, your emotions are yours. They don't belong to the loudest voice in the room. They don't belong to the person who cries the hardest or demands the fastest answer. So take a breath, pause, reflect, because in that quiet space between reaction and response, that's where your freedom lives. If this resonated with you, don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more empowering tools to reclaim your peace and power. Number 3. Set boundaries calmly, not emotionally. Now let's talk about one of the most powerful yet misunderstood ways to disarm: manipulation by setting boundaries without raising your voice. Because here's something many people miss. Manipulators don't just fear resistance, they fear calm resistance. They want you to get emotional, defensive, overwhelmed. That's their goal, because the moment your voice rises or your tone sharpens, you give them an excuse. Suddenly, you're no longer the calm person with valid concerns. You're too sensitive, too angry, or hard to deal with. The louder you get, the easier you are to label as unstable, dramatic, or difficult to work with. But when you set a boundary with composure, when you meet their pressure with stillness, look them directly in the eye and simply say no. Without flinching, without over-explaining, and without apologizing, that's what truly unsettles them. It's not the word itself. It's the unshakable calm behind it. Here's the truth. A calm boundary carries more weight than a heated argument. Anger may feel powerful in the moment. It may feel like you're standing your ground, but it also gives the other person something to push against. It feeds their narrative. It justifies their manipulation. It keeps the cycle spinning. But stillness? That's a different kind of power. It doesn't argue. It doesn't chase or convince. It just holds. And when someone tries to twist your words, question your motives, or guilt trip you into backing down, and you respond not with emotion, but with steady, quiet clarity, they lose their grip. Why? Because manipulators rely on chaos, on reaction, on noise. When you refuse to give them either, their control starts to slip. That's why most manipulators escalate when their usual tactics stop working. They're not used to people who don't play by their rules, who don't yell or plead or explain themselves into exhaustion. This is where Stoic philosophy becomes a quiet weapon. Epictetus once said, "It is not harshness to protect your peace, it is wisdom." Let that settle in, because setting boundaries isn't about being cold or uncaring. It's about being clear. It's about protecting your time, your energy, and your emotional space, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. A Stoic doesn't feel the need to soften every no with an explanation or cushion every decision with endless reassurance. They know that protecting their values is not an act of cruelty, it's a declaration of self-worth. And when you begin to stand in that truth, something changes. You no longer seek approval. You no longer explain your every move. You set the boundary and you let your silence reinforce it. Let me share a story. A woman I know, let's call her Rachel, had a sister who constantly crossed emotional lines. She'd show up without warning, unload her drama, ask for favors, then disappear until her next crisis. It was always urgent, always about her, and always draining. And whenever Rachel tried to express how this affected her, the response was a flood of guilt. "So now I'm a burden?" Or, "Wow, I thought we were family." At first, Rachel did what so many people do, she explained. She wrote long texts. She called to clarify. She poured energy into trying to be both honest and gentle. But nothing changed. The cycle continued until one day, she did something radically simple. The next time her sister called to vent for hours, Rachel paused, took a breath, and said calmly, "I love you, but I'm not available for this right now." No anger, number, defense, just quiet truth. And then she hung up. That single moment did more than years of explaining ever had. Her sister was stunned. She didn't know how to respond. Why? Because Rachel didn't give her a script to work with. She didn't play the role of the cold sister or the apologetic one. She simply ended the performance. She drew the line without stepping into the drama. That's the Stoic boundary. Firm, quiet, and unapologetically clear. So, how can you start applying this in your own life? First, Decide what your limit is. Get clear on it privately, before the moment. Commies. You don't need to justify it, even to yourself. Second. Practice saying it out loud. Short, calm, rehearsed speech. No emotional build-up. Just clarity. And third, when that limit is challenged, because it will be, don't argue. Don't over-explain. Just repeat. Because a real boundary doesn't require volume. It just requires consistency. They need consistency. At the end of the day, your peace doesn't require anyone's approval. What it truly demands is protection. And when you can set a firm boundary, delivered in a calm, steady tone, that's not a sign of weakness. It's a demonstration of mastery. Number 4. Don't over-justify your decisions. This is one of the most subtle yet powerful traps manipulators use to wear you down. You make a choice. Perhaps you say no to a request, or you simply prioritize what's best for you, and almost immediately, you feel that familiar pressure creeping in. Why not? They ask. Are you sure? Don't you think you're being a little harsh? Suddenly, you're no longer just holding your boundary. You're forced into defending it. You begin justifying every tiny detail of your decision, hoping that finally, they will say, "Oh, okay. That makes sense." But here's the harsh truth. Manipulators aren't interested in understanding your reasons. What they really want is to find cracks, weaknesses, openings they can exploit. And every word you offer gives them more material to twist and use against you. Here's the core of the problem. Over-justification is really a form of self-doubt. It's the attempt to prove to someone else that your peace, your choice, your boundary is valid and worthy of respect. But this effort is futile, because if someone truly respects you, they don't demand an essay-length explanation. And if they are trying to control you, no explanation will ever be enough. That's why the Stoic refuses to over-explain. They don't hand over their power by drowning their decisions in endless justifications. Instead, they speak with clarity, confidence, and calm, not desperation. They understand that sometimes, the most powerful sentence you can say is simply, no. Seneca once said, "Say only what is necessary and let your actions speak the rest." That's not coldness. That's wisdom. Manipulators thrive on dialogue, on dragging you into their tangled web of stories and counter-narratives. But when your response is clean, clear, and calm, they find nowhere to go. You don't owe anyone a debate about your peace. You don't owe anyone an emotional performance explaining why you chose yourself. What you owe first and foremost is yourself. The dignity of standing firm in your truth. Let me tell you about someone I know. His name's Brian. He had a friend who constantly asked for favors, rides, money, help moving, even cover stories for lies. Every time Brian said no, it turned into a guilt trip. So Brian tried explaining himself. "I'm tired. I have work. I can't afford it right now." But with each explanation, the manipulator found a workaround. "It won't take long. You can rest afterward. You're my only real friend." It didn't take long for Brian to realize his words weren't building understanding. Instead, they were handing over ammunition. So the next time he was asked for something he didn't want to do, he simply said, "I'm not available for that." Period. No explanation, no apology. Just a clean sentence, delivered in a calm tone. Manipulator was left speechless, because there was nothing left to twist. So how do you stop over-justifying? First, practice silence. Allow your calm, firm boundary to speak for itself. You don't have to fill the space with endless explanations or apologies. Second, speak your decision once. Not twice, not with disclaimers or qualifiers. Just say it clearly and firmly. And third, let the discomfort sit. Feel it without rushing to fix it or smooth things over. You're not being rude. you're being rooted in your own truth. After all, your peace is not a courtroom where you must prove your case. You simply need to stand by your choice and let that be enough. If you've watched this far, I want to thank you for your time. Don't forget to leave a comment saying "Thank God" and give this video a like if you found the content valuable. Your support truly means a lot and motivates me to keep creating more insightful and meaningful videos. I hope these stories inspire you and that we continue learning together. Thank you again for your support. Number 5. Detach emotionally from their approval. This is one of the quietest, most insidious forms of control manipulators wield. They use approval as currency, dispensing it when you're useful, withdrawing it when you set boundaries, and weaponizing guilt by withholding warmth the moment you stop playing their game. This manipulation isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's as subtle as a delayed reply, a cold shoulder, or a sudden change in tone. But the message underneath remains clear and consistent. Do what I want, or I'll make you feel small. If your self-worth is tied to their approval, this tactic hits especially hard. You start doubting yourself, wondering what you did wrong, chasing after their attention, shrinking yourself just to get back in their good graces. And that is exactly what they want. But here's the truth. The need for someone else's approval is the fastest way to lose your peace, because suddenly, every decision you make, every boundary you try to set, every moment of honesty is measured against how they might react. And that is not freedom, it's emotional debt. The more you rely on their validation, the deeper their control grows. That's why detaching from their approval isn't cold or uncaring. It's essential. When someone can manipulate your sense of self-worth through silence or disapproval, they're not your friend. They're your puppeteer. This is where Stoic wisdom becomes a true game-changer. Epictetus said, "He who seeks approval is already enslaved." The Stoics understood that real freedom isn't about applause or praise, it's about self-respect. When your inner peace depends on someone else's mood, you lose yourself in their storm. But when you know who you are, what you value, and what you stand for, you stop begging for validation. You don't need their affection to feel worthy. Instead, you need your own clarity. Let me share a story about someone I know. Her name's Jessica. She was in a relationship where love came with conditions. When she agreed with him, praised him, or sacrificed her own needs for his, he was sweet and affectionate. But the moment she said no or stood her ground, he pulled away. No calls, no affection, just cold detachment. And it worked. For a long time, Jessica would fold under the pressure just to feel close again. But one day, she saw it for what it truly was, a transaction. Not love, not care, just control. That's what she finally realized. So she stopped playing the manipulator's game. She made her choices firmly based on her own values, rather than constantly reacting to his shifting moods or need for dominance. And when he pulled away again, she didn't chase after his approval or warmth. She let him go because she no longer depended on his affection to feel complete or whole. So how do you apply this in your own life? First, become aware. Notice the moments when you start craving someone's approval. Pause and ask yourself why. What need are you trying to fill? Second, ground yourself deeply in your own values. What do you believe in regardless of whether others praise or reject you? And third, stop chasing approval. If someone withdraws when you show strength or stand your ground, let them. That silence, that distance, says far more about their insecurities than about your worth. At the end of the day, your worth isn't a popularity contest or a vote that others get to cast. It's an uncheckable truth. And the very moment you detach from their approval is the moment you reclaim your power. Number 6. Let your silence do the work. This is one of the most underestimated yet powerful tools in your emotional arsenal. Silence, not the timid, passive kind that avoids conflict or hides fear, but an intentional, grounded, and powerful silence. Why? Because sometimes the best way to expose manipulation, disrespect, or toxicity is simply by saying nothing at all. When someone tries to pull you into their chaos, to bait you with drama, or provoke you into defending yourself, silence becomes your strongest response. Manipulators expect you to react. They want you to explain, argue, justify, because every word you give them is a thread they can pull, weaving you deeper into their web. But silence cuts that thread. It creates space for you to think clearly and regain your composure. Space for them to confront their own behavior without your energy fueling their game. And most importantly, space for your peace to return, intact and undisturbed. Seneca once wrote, "The wise man is silent in the face of fools," and it's true. Wisdom does not rush to prove itself, nor does it engage in shouting matches or petty arguments. It simply stands still, calm and unshaken. In doing so, it exposes falsehood without uttering a single word. That is the power of silence. It reveals truth. It forces people to sit with their own intentions and reflect. Suddenly, they are not reacting to you, but to themselves. And often, that is the most powerful confrontation of all. Let me share a story. A man I know, let's call him Michael, worked under a supervisor who delighted in pushing his buttons. Subtle jabs during meetings, passive-aggressive comments, and little public remarks designed specifically to make Michael feel small and powerless. At first, Michael fought back. He tried to explain himself, to correct the narrative, and to stand up firmly every single time the supervisor pushed him. But no matter how much he defended himself, nothing changed. In fact, the situation only escalated. The more he reacted, the more the supervisor intensified his tactics, feeding off Michael's energy and turning the workplace into a battlefield. It was exhausting and disheartening. Until one day, Michael decided to do something different. Instead of reacting, he chose silence. When the cutting comments came his way, he didn't flinch or respond with anger or frustration. He simply looked at his supervisor calmly, nodded once, and moved on. No defense, no emotion, just a steady, calm presence that said, without words, "I will not engage in this game." Slowly but surely, the dynamic shifted. The supervisor realized he couldn't manipulate or provoke someone who refused to fight back. The energy Michael once gave away freely was now held firmly within himself, and that change was palpable. So, how can you use this strategy in your own life? First, recognize that silence is a choice, not a retreat. It's a powerful tool when wielded intentionally. Second, always take a deep breath before you respond. If someone is fishing for a reaction, don't take the bait, hold your ground. And third, let your calmness be the loudest thing in the room. Remember, silence isn't weakness. It's wisdom wrapped in restraint. Not every insult requires a comeback. Not every lie demands correction. Sometimes the most powerful response is simply no response at all. If you found this insight valuable, please hit like and subscribe for more powerful lessons like this. Number 7. Observe their reaction to your strength. One of the clearest ways to spot manipulation is to watch how someone responds when you stop being soft, silent, or agreeable. Manipulators don't just play mind games with words, they also test your inner strength. And the moment you show up by setting clear boundaries, saying no firmly, or simply standing steady in your truth, they reveal their true colors. A genuine friend, a real and honest person, will respect your clarity even if they don't fully agree with you. But a manipulator? They will get defensive. They'll shift blame, twist your intentions, or attack your tone instead of addressing the truth you're holding. Why? Because your strength exposes something they never wanted you to see, their real intent. Here's the truth: when you grow stronger, more self-aware, and unshakable in your values, the people who benefited from your previous silence or softness will feel uncomfortable. Not because you have changed for the worse, but because they can no longer exploit the old version of you. They were relying on your doubt, your guilt, your emotional softness. But when you show up clear and steady, their tactics stop working, and that creates friction. Not because you are doing anything wrong, but because they have lost control. This is precisely where Stoic philosophy serves as a compass for navigating these difficult interactions. Marcus Aurelius wisely said, "A man's worth is measured by what he values in others." When someone resents your strength, it's not about you, it's about what they value. They never valued your honesty or your boundaries. Instead, they valued what they could get away with, what leverage they had over you. And that, ultimately, is the measure of their character. Your growth offends them because it removes their power, their ability to manipulate, and their control over you. And that discomfort, that subtle shift, that's their mask slipping. Let me share a story about a guy named Caleb. For years he had a best friend named Darren who constantly relied on Caleb to fix things, to agree, to drop everything and help, no matter how inconvenient it was. Caleb never said no. He was afraid to rock the boat, always bending to keep the peace, even when it cost him personally. But as time went on, something began to change. Caleb started therapy. He began journaling his thoughts and emotions. He immersed himself in the wisdom of Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus. Slowly, step by step, he found his voice and rebuilt his boundaries. Then came the moment of truth. One day, when Darren asked for something unreasonable again, something that crossed a line, Caleb simply said, "I can't do that this time." That was it. No anger, no apology, just calm and clear clarity. Darren didn't take it well. He called Caleb selfish. He made passive-aggressive jokes about how Caleb was too enlightened now to care. But Caleb didn't flinch, didn't waver, and in that reaction, he saw something crystal clear. Darren wasn't upset because Caleb set a boundary. Darren was upset because he lost access to the version of Caleb who never said no. And that realization, it was liberating. It freed Caleb from the chains of others' expectations and from his own fear of confrontation. So, how do you apply this powerful lesson in your own life? First, watch closely. Don't rush to explain or defend yourself. Just observe how people respond when you start standing your ground. If someone's affection or love disappears the moment you become stronger, more self-assured, it was never love to begin with. It was dependency, control disguised as care. Real connection doesn't fear your strength, it grows with it. And manipulation? It withers away in the light of your newfound power. At the end of the day, your strength won't push away the right people. Instead, it will reveal who was only sticking around because they thrived on your weakness. That's a clarity worth embracing. If you found this video helpful, please give it a like. It really helps the YouTube algorithm share this message with more people who need it. Don't forget to subscribe for more empowering content coming your way. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below, and I promise to reply.